You are about to view a factual representation of our legal battles. There is no commentary here, just unfiltered, unedited, and raw footage. We are taking you straight to the front lines of justice to observe the system exactly as it operates.
License and registration, now.
Officer, may I ask why I was stopped?
What are you doing in this neighborhood?
I'm driving home from work.
Step out, now.
Can I ask why? I haven't done anything wrong.
Out of the car, now.
You know what they say about assumptions making an ass out of you and me. But what happens when those assumptions are made by someone wearing a badge and carrying a gun on Christmas Eve? What happens when those split-second judgments destroy not just one life, but ripple through an entire community? Tonight, I'm going to tell you about a traffic stop that lasted 11 minutes and changed everything forever. Before we dive into this incredible story, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button because this story is going to blow your mind with how quickly everything can fall apart when prejudice meets power. The dashboard camera started recording at exactly 11:43 p.m. on December 24th, Christmas Eve. Most people were home wrapping last-minute presents or settling in for the night. But not everyone gets to celebrate holidays the same way. Some people have to work. Some people have emergencies. And some people, well, some people are about to have their entire world turned upside down by someone who should have known better. Captain Robert Hayes was driving home from the station that night. He'd just finished a 16-hour shift dealing with a warehouse fire that had taken most of his crew until late evening to contain. The man was exhausted. He drove a modest sedan, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed, "Look at me." He wore civilian clothes because his shift was over, a simple black hoodie and jeans. He was thinking about getting home to his family, maybe catching the tail end of Christmas Eve dinner with his wife and 2 kids. Robert had served his community for 18 years. 18 years of running into burning buildings while everyone else ran out. 18 years of saving lives, protecting property, and earning the respect of everyone who knew him. He'd been promoted to captain just 2 years earlier, the youngest person in the department's history to achieve that rank. His record was spotless. His reputation was sterling. His colleagues called him a hero, and they meant it. But none of that mattered when Officer Derek Sullivan spotted his car that night. Sullivan had been a police officer for just 3 years. 3 years of complaints, 3 years of questionable stops, 3 years of walking the line between acceptable and problematic. His supervisors had noticed patterns. Internal Affairs had received reports. But somehow, Sullivan kept slipping through the cracks, kept finding ways to explain away his behavior, kept getting the benefit of the doubt. That night, Sullivan was patrolling the quieter side of town, the side where the houses were bigger, the lawns were manicured, and people like Sullivan believed certain types of people simply didn't belong. When he saw Robert's sedan driving through the neighborhood at a normal speed, obeying every traffic law, something in Sullivan's brain made a decision that would ruin both their lives. Sullivan flipped on his lights and pulled Robert over. Now here's where things get interesting. Robert wasn't speeding. He wasn't weaving. His car wasn't stolen. His registration was current. His insurance was valid. His license was clean. There was absolutely no legitimate reason for this stop, but Sullivan had made up his mind, and he was going to find a reason to justify it. Robert pulled over immediately. He turned off his engine, rolled down his window, and placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be clearly seen. This wasn't his first encounter with law enforcement, and he knew the drill. Stay calm, comply with requests, and get home safely. That was the goal. Sullivan approached the driver's side window with his hand resting on his weapon. Before he even reached the car, his body language was aggressive, confrontational. The dashboard camera captured everything, and later, experts would analyze every frame of this footage to understand exactly how things went so wrong so fast. Sullivan asked for Robert's license and registration. Robert calmly reached for his wallet, moving slowly and deliberately. He handed over his documents and waited. Sullivan studied them for a long time, much longer than necessary. He walked back to his patrol car and ran Robert's information through the system. Everything came back clean, of course. No warrants, no violations, No red flags of any kind. But Sullivan wasn't satisfied. He walked back to Robert's window and asked him what he was doing in this neighborhood. Think about that question for a moment. What he was doing in this neighborhood. As if driving through a public street was somehow suspicious. As if certain people needed special permission to travel through certain areas. Robert remained calm. He explained that he was driving home from work. Sullivan asked where he worked. Robert said he was a firefighter. Sullivan's expression changed, but not in the way you might expect. Instead of showing respect for a fellow first responder, Sullivan seemed to become more suspicious, more hostile. He asked Robert to step out of the vehicle. This is where Robert made his first mistake, though it wasn't really a mistake at all. He asked why. He asked what he had done wrong. He asked for the legal justification for the stop. These are reasonable questions that any citizen has the right to ask. But Sullivan didn't see them as reasonable. He saw them as defiance. The situation escalated quickly from there. Sullivan's voice got louder, more aggressive. He repeated his order for Robert to exit the vehicle, this time with his hand moving closer to his weapon. Robert complied, stepping out of his car with his hands visible, moving slowly and carefully. What happened next was captured in crystal clear detail by the dashboard camera. Sullivan ordered Robert to turn around and place his hands on the roof of the car. Robert complied. Sullivan began searching him, roughly, aggressively, checking his pockets, patting him down as if he were looking for weapons or drugs. Let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever been pulled over for no reason? Have you ever been made to feel like a criminal when you were just trying to get home? Drop a comment and let me know. Because what happened to Robert happens to people every single day, but it doesn't always get recorded. Sullivan found nothing during his search because there was nothing to find. No weapons, no drugs, no contraband of any kind. Just a wallet, keys, and a cell phone. But he wasn't done. He told Robert he was going to search the vehicle. Robert asked if Sullivan had a warrant. He asked if he was under arrest. He asked what crime he was suspected of committing. Again, perfectly reasonable questions that any citizen has the right to ask. And again, Sullivan interpreted these questions as resistance. The search of Robert's car was thorough and invasive. Sullivan went through the glove compartment, under the seats, in the trunk. He pulled out Robert's gym bag and went through it piece by piece. He found workout clothes, protein powder, and a few energy bars. Nothing illegal, nothing suspicious, nothing that justified this level of scrutiny. But Sullivan kept digging. He seemed determined to find something, anything, that would validate his decision to make this stop. When the car search turned up nothing, he turned his attention back to Robert himself. That's when Sullivan noticed something in Robert's wallet during his search. Something that should have ended this encounter immediately. Something that should have made Sullivan apologize and send Robert on his way. Robert's firefighter identification card, clearly visible, showing his rank as captain. Most officers would have been embarrassed at this point. Most would have realized they had just pulled over and harassed a fellow public servant for no reason. Most would have found a way to de-escalate and end the encounter gracefully. Sullivan was not most officers. Instead of backing down, Sullivan seemed to double down. He studied the ID card suspiciously, as if it might be fake. He asked Robert pointed questions about the fire department, testing him, trying to catch him in a lie. He asked about recent calls, about equipment, about procedures, as if a fake firefighter would somehow have memorized the department's entire operational manual. Robert answered every question correctly, of course, because he actually was who he said he was. But Sullivan wasn't convinced. Or maybe he was convinced and just couldn't bring himself to admit his mistake. The encounter dragged on for 43 minutes. 43 minutes of harassment, suspicion, and intimidation. 43 minutes of a decorated fire captain being treated like a common criminal on Christmas Eve. 43 minutes that were about to become the most expensive 43 minutes of Officer Sullivan's life. Because Robert wasn't just any firefighter. He wasn't just any captain. Robert Hayes was connected, respected, and known throughout the community. When word got out about what happened to him, people were going to be angry. When they saw the dashboard camera footage, they were going to be outraged. And when the lawyers got involved, when the internal investigation began, When the federal authorities started asking questions, Officer Sullivan was going to learn a very expensive lesson about the consequences of racial profiling. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, because the traffic stop wasn't over yet. Sullivan was about to make another decision that would seal his fate and ensure that this Christmas Eve encounter would be remembered for years to come. The dashboard camera kept rolling, capturing every word, every gesture, every moment of an encounter that should never have happened in the first place. And what it captured next was going to shock everyone who saw it. After 43 minutes of harassment, Sullivan made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Instead of ending this nightmare and letting Robert go home to his family, he decided to arrest him on Christmas Eve for absolutely nothing. Sullivan claimed that Robert was being disorderly, that he had failed to comply with lawful orders, that his behavior was suspicious and warranted further investigation. Every single word was a lie, and every single word was being recorded by the dashboard camera that Sullivan seemed to have forgotten was running. Robert remained calm as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. He didn't resist. He didn't argue. He simply asked, one more time, what he was being charged with. Sullivan mumbled something about obstruction of justice and disorderly conduct, charges that would never stick, charges that were completely fabricated, charges that existed only in Sullivan's imagination. As Robert was placed in the back of the patrol car, his phone began buzzing. His wife Sarah was calling, wondering where he was. The kids were asking when Daddy was coming home. Christmas Eve dinner was getting cold. But Robert couldn't answer because he was sitting in the back of a police car, arrested for the crime of driving while black in the wrong neighborhood. The booking process took another 2 hours. 2 hours of fingerprints, mugshots, and paperwork. 2 hours of Robert being processed like a common criminal while his family waited at home, growing more worried by the minute. Sarah called his cell phone dozens of times. When it kept going to voicemail, she called the fire station. That phone call changed everything. The fire chief who answered the phone couldn't believe what he was hearing. Captain Hayes arrested? On Christmas Eve? For what? When Sarah explained what little she knew, the chief immediately started making calls, first to the police station, then to the mayor, then to anyone else who would listen. Word spread quickly through the fire department. Robert's colleagues were shocked, then angry, then determined to do something about it. These weren't just co-workers. They were brothers and sisters who had risked their lives together, who trusted each other with their safety every single day. Battalion Chief Michael Torres had worked with Robert for 12 years. When he heard what happened, he drove straight to the police station and demanded answers. The desk sergeant tried to brush him off, said it was an ongoing investigation, said he couldn't comment on pending cases. Torres wasn't having it. He knew exactly what kind of man Robert was. He knew Robert's character, his integrity, his dedication to service. The idea that Robert had committed any crime was laughable. The idea that he had been disorderly or uncooperative was insulting. More firefighters started showing up at the police station. Not to cause trouble, not to be disruptive, but to support their captain and demand answers. By midnight, there were 15 firefighters in the lobby of the police station, all asking the same questions. What happened? What was Robert charged with? When would he be released? The police administration was not prepared for this level of scrutiny. They were used to making arrests and having people disappear into the system quietly. They weren't used to having an entire fire department asking questions and demanding accountability. Meanwhile, Robert sat in a holding cell, still wearing his civilian clothes, still trying to process what had happened to him. He thought about his 18 years of service, his spotless record, his dedication to protecting and serving the same community that had just arrested him for no reason. He thought about all the times he had worked alongside police officers at emergency scenes. The mutual respect, the shared commitment to public safety, the brotherhood that was supposed to exist between first responders. All of that felt like a lie now, sitting in this cell on Christmas Eve. At 2:47 a.m. on Christmas morning, Robert was finally released. The charges were dropped, quietly and without explanation. No apology, No acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just a desk sergeant handing him back his belongings and telling him he was free to go. Robert walked out of the police station to find his entire crew waiting for him. 15 firefighters who had spent their Christmas Eve in a police lobby, refusing to leave until their captain was freed. The sight of their faces, the relief in their eyes, the anger on his behalf, it was almost too much to process. But this story was just beginning, because while Robert was spending Christmas in jail, someone had already started asking the right questions. Someone with the power to demand real answers and the connections to make sure this incident didn't disappear into the bureaucratic void. City Councilwoman Elena Rodriguez had received a call at 1 a.m. from a firefighter's wife who was terrified and confused. Rodriguez had served on the city council for 8 years, and she had built her reputation on holding the police department accountable for their actions. When she heard what happened to Robert, she knew exactly what she was dealing with. Rodriguez had seen this pattern before. Good officers doing their jobs professionally, but bad officers like Sullivan continuing to operate with impunity, protected by a system that valued loyalty over justice. She had been fighting this battle for years, and now she had a case that could finally make a difference. The next morning, while Robert was trying to salvage Christmas with his family, Rodriguez was already making phone calls. To the mayor, to the police chief, to reporters who had covered similar stories in the past. She knew that without public pressure, without media attention, this incident would be buried and forgotten. The dashboard camera footage was the key to everything. Rodriguez knew that if the public could see what really happened during that traffic stop, there would be no way to cover it up or explain it away. She also knew that getting access to that footage would be a battle. Police departments don't like releasing videos that make them look bad. They have lawyers and procedures and policies designed to keep embarrassing footage away from public view. But Rodriguez had lawyers too, and she knew how to use public records laws to her advantage. The formal request for the dashboard camera footage was filed on December 26th. The police department had 30 days to respond, but Rodriguez wasn't planning to wait that long. She held a press conference that same day, standing on the steps of City Hall with Robert beside her. Robert looked tired but determined as he told his story to the assembled reporters. He spoke about his 18 years of service, his dedication to the community, his shock and disappointment at how he had been treated. He didn't sound angry or vindictive. He sounded like a man who believed in justice and wanted to make sure this didn't happen to anyone else. The local news picked up the story immediately. Fire captain arrested on Christmas Eve for no reason. Decorated first responder claims racial profiling by police. The headlines wrote themselves, and the story spread quickly through social media and local news networks. Officer Sullivan, meanwhile, was watching his world begin to collapse. His supervisors called him into the office the day after Christmas, demanding explanations for his actions. The dashboard camera footage was already being reviewed by internal affairs, and what they saw was not good for Sullivan's career prospects. The video showed everything: Sullivan's aggressive approach, his unjustified stop, his baseless search, his fabricated arrest. There was no way to spin it, no way to make it look reasonable or justified. Sullivan had violated department policy, constitutional rights, and basic human decency, and it was all captured in high-definition video. But Sullivan wasn't going down without a fight. He hired a lawyer, a former prosecutor, who specialized in defending police officers accused of misconduct. The lawyer's strategy was predictable: attack Robert's character, question his version of events, and argue that Sullivan had acted within his authority as a police officer. This strategy might have worked in the past, before body cameras and dashboard videos, before social media and citizen journalists. But in this case, with clear video evidence of exactly what happened, it was doomed to fail. The FBI got involved 3 weeks after the incident. Federal authorities had been monitoring patterns of racial profiling in the police department for months, and Robert's case was exactly the kind of clear-cut example they needed to build a larger case. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh reviewed the dashboard camera footage and immediately recognized it as evidence of a federal civil rights violation. When a police officer deprives someone of their constitutional rights under the color of law, it becomes a federal crime punishable by significant prison time. Sullivan's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the evidence was too strong and the public attention was too intense. The FBI wasn't interested in letting this case disappear quietly. They wanted to send a message that racial profiling by police officers would not be tolerated, and Sullivan was going to be the example. The investigation into Sullivan's conduct revealed a pattern that shocked even experienced federal investigators. Agent Walsh discovered that Sullivan had made over 200 traffic stops in the past year, and an alarming percentage of them involved drivers who looked exactly like Robert. Young black men driving through affluent neighborhoods, Hispanic families traveling to visit relatives, anyone who, in Sullivan's twisted worldview, didn't belong where he found them. The FBI's analysis of Sullivan's arrest records painted a picture of systematic racial bias that went far beyond one Christmas Eve traffic stop. They found stops where Sullivan had detained people for hours without cause, searches conducted without consent or probable cause, and arrests that were later dismissed because the charges were completely fabricated. What made Robert's case different wasn't just the clear video evidence. It was the fact that Robert fought back through proper channels, had the resources and support to demand justice, and refused to let this incident be swept under the rug like so many others had been. The civil lawsuit was filed in federal court 6 weeks after the incident. Robert's legal team, led by civil rights attorney David Kim, didn't just sue Sullivan. They sued the police department, the city, and every supervisor who had enabled Sullivan's behavior over the years. The lawsuit painted a picture of institutional racism, inadequate training, and deliberate indifference to constitutional violations. The depositions were devastating for the defense. Sullivan's former partner testified that he had repeatedly raised concerns about Sullivan's conduct, but was told to mind his own business. A former police chief admitted that complaints against Sullivan had been minimized or ignored because he was considered a productive officer who made a lot of arrests. The most damaging testimony came from Sullivan's own training records. The FBI discovered that he had failed multiple sections of his diversity and de-escalation training, but had been passed anyway. His psychological evaluation had noted concerning attitudes about race and authority, but these red flags had been ignored by hiring officials. As the investigation deepened, more victims came forward. Maria Santos, a nurse driving home from a night shift, described being pulled over by Sullivan and subjected to a humiliating roadside search while her young children watched from the back seat. James Wilson, a college professor, told investigators how Sullivan had arrested him for asking too many questions during a routine traffic stop. Each new victim strengthened the federal case against Sullivan and exposed the broader problems within the police department. The pattern was undeniable, the evidence overwhelming, and the community's anger growing by the day. Public protests began in earnest after the dashboard camera footage was finally released. The video went viral within hours, shared millions of times across social media platforms. People who had never heard of Robert Hayes before were outraged by what they saw. The footage showed a clear example of everything that was wrong with policing in America, and it couldn't be explained away or rationalized. The police union initially defended Sullivan, claiming he had followed proper procedures and that the arrest was justified. But as more evidence emerged and public pressure mounted, even his strongest supporters began to distance themselves. The union eventually stopped paying for his legal defense, leaving Sullivan to face federal charges with an overworked public defender. The federal grand jury took only 3 hours to return an indictment against Sullivan. The charges included deprivation of civil rights under color of law, false imprisonment, and conspiracy to violate constitutional rights. Each charge carried significant prison time, and federal prosecutors made it clear they intended to seek the maximum sentence. Sullivan's trial began 11 months after that Christmas Eve traffic stop. The courtroom was packed every day with firefighters, community activists, and concerned citizens who wanted to see justice served. Robert attended every session, sitting quietly in the gallery, his presence a constant reminder of what this case was really about. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They played the dashboard camera footage in its entirety, walked the jury through Sullivan's pattern of misconduct, and presented expert testimony about racial profiling and police abuse of power. The evidence was so overwhelming that Sullivan's attorney barely attempted a defense. The jury deliberated for just 2 days before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Sullivan showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, but his family members in the gallery broke down in tears. His wife, his children, his parents, all victims of his choices, all paying the price for his hatred and bias. The sentencing hearing took place 3 months later. Federal prosecutors asked for the maximum penalty, arguing that Sullivan's crimes were particularly egregious because he had abused the power and trust that came with wearing a badge. They presented victim impact statements from Robert and the dozen other people who had come forward to describe their encounters with Sullivan. Robert's statement was powerful and dignified. He spoke about the fear he felt that night, the humiliation of being arrested in front of his neighbors, the impact on his family and his reputation in the community. But he also spoke about forgiveness and the hope that his experience might prevent others from suffering the same injustice. The judge, a veteran federal jurist who had seen thousands of cases, said Sullivan's conduct represented everything that was wrong with modern policing. He noted that Sullivan had shown no remorse, taken no responsibility, and demonstrated no understanding of the harm he had caused. The sentence was 6 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Sullivan was led away in handcuffs, beginning a prison term that would cost him everything. His career was over, his reputation destroyed, his family's financial security shattered. The man who had thought he could target and harass innocent people with impunity was learning that actions have consequences, even for those who wear badges. But the consequences extended far beyond Sullivan himself. The civil lawsuit resulted in a $12 million settlement for Robert and the other victims. The police department was placed under federal oversight, forced to implement sweeping reforms to their training, hiring, and accountability systems. The police chief resigned in disgrace, followed by 2 assistant chiefs and the head of internal affairs. The entire command structure that had enabled Sullivan's behavior was dismantled and rebuilt with new leadership committed to constitutional policing and community accountability. More importantly, Robert's case became a catalyst for broader change. The city council passed new ordinances requiring body cameras for all officers, independent investigation of police misconduct, and mandatory reporting of racial bias incidents. These reforms were directly inspired by Robert's experience and named in his honor. The fire department rallied around their captain throughout the ordeal. Robert was promoted to battalion chief 6 months after Sullivan's conviction, a recognition of his courage in standing up for justice and his continued dedication to public service. His colleagues organized fundraisers for legal expenses, attended court hearings in uniform, and made sure the community knew they stood behind him completely. Sullivan's former colleagues had mixed reactions to his downfall. Some expressed shock and claimed they never saw his racist behavior, though the evidence suggested otherwise. Others admitted they had suspected problems but hadn't known how to address them. A few brave officers came forward to testify about the culture of silence that had protected Sullivan for so long. The psychological evaluation conducted during Sullivan's sentencing revealed troubling insights into his mindset. The court-appointed psychiatrist found evidence of deep-seated racial prejudices, an inflated sense of authority, and a complete inability to empathize with his victims. These findings supported the prosecution's argument that Sullivan's crimes were motivated by hate rather than simple poor judgment. Prison was not kind to Sullivan. Former police officers faced particular dangers behind bars, and his high-profile conviction made him a target. He spent most of his sentence in protective custody, isolated from other inmates, but also cut off from human contact for 23 hours a day. His family struggled with the shame and financial hardship of his imprisonment. His wife divorced him after 2 years, taking their children and moving across the country to escape the notoriety. His parents stopped visiting after the first year, unable to reconcile the son they raised with the man he had become. Meanwhile, Robert rebuilt his life and career stronger than ever. He used his platform as a high-profile police misconduct victim to advocate for criminal justice reform, speaking at conferences and universities about the need for accountability in law enforcement. His story became a case study in police training programs, a real-world example of how racial bias destroys lives and communities. The dashboard camera footage from that Christmas Eve traffic stop was viewed over 50 million times across various platforms. It became one of the most clear-cut examples of racial profiling ever captured on video, impossible to misinterpret or explain away. Law schools used it to teach constitutional law, and police academies used it as an example of how not to conduct a traffic stop. Sullivan's conviction sent shockwaves through police departments across the country. Officers who had been engaging in similar conduct suddenly found themselves looking over their shoulders, wondering if they might be next. The message was clear. The days of immunity for racist policing were ending, and federal prosecutors were serious about holding officers accountable. The broader impact of the case extended to legislative reform as well. Congress held hearings on police accountability, using Robert's experience as evidence of the need for federal intervention in local law enforcement. Several states passed new laws strengthening protections against racial profiling and requiring independent investigation of police misconduct. 6 years later, Sullivan walked out of federal prison a broken man. His hair had gone gray, his face was gaunt, and his eyes held the hollow look of someone who had lost everything. No family waited for him. No job prospects existed. The world had moved on while he served his time, and there was no place in it for a disgraced former police officer with a federal conviction for civil rights violations. He tried to find work, any work, but background checks killed every opportunity. Fast food restaurants, warehouse jobs, construction crews, they all turned him away once they discovered his history. The internet made it impossible to hide. His mugshot, his conviction, that dashboard camera footage, it all followed him everywhere he went. Sullivan ended up in a halfway house in a different state, far from where his crimes had taken place. He worked part-time cleaning office buildings at night, making minimum wage and struggling to pay for basic necessities. The man who had once wielded absolute power over innocent people now couldn't even afford a decent meal. His former colleagues at the police department rarely spoke his name anymore. The new chief had implemented zero-tolerance policies for racial profiling, and Sullivan's case was used as a cautionary tale during training sessions. Academy instructors would play that Christmas Eve footage and ask recruits what they saw wrong with Sullivan's approach. The answers filled whiteboards with violations and constitutional breaches. Robert, meanwhile, had become something of a legend within the fire service. His courage in fighting back against injustice had inspired other first responders to speak out against misconduct in their own departments. He received invitations to speak at conferences across the country, sharing his story and advocating for accountability in all aspects of public safety. The financial settlement from the lawsuit had been substantial, but Robert used most of it to establish a foundation, providing legal assistance to victims of police misconduct. The Hayes Foundation had already helped dozens of families pursue justice, providing the resources and support that many victims couldn't afford on their own. His wife Sarah had stood by him throughout the ordeal, but the stress had taken its toll on their marriage. The constant media attention, the legal proceedings, the death threats from Sullivan's supporters, it had all been overwhelming. They attended counseling together, working through the trauma and rebuilding their relationship stronger than before. Their children, who had been young during the incident, grew up understanding that their father was a hero who had fought against injustice. But they also learned about the dangers of speaking truth to power, the price that comes with refusing to stay silent when others would prefer you disappeared quietly. The police department that had enabled Sullivan's behavior for years underwent massive changes. Federal oversight meant every policy, every training program, every hiring decision was scrutinized by outside monitors. Officers complained about the new restrictions, but community trust slowly began to rebuild as the department demonstrated real commitment to constitutional policing. Some of Sullivan's former supervisors faced their own consequences. The lieutenant who had ignored complaints about Sullivan's conduct was demoted and transferred to a desk job. The sergeant who had coached Sullivan on how to write reports that would survive scrutiny was suspended without pay and eventually resigned under pressure. The dashboard camera footage continued to serve as evidence long after Sullivan's conviction. Federal prosecutors used it in other cases involving police misconduct, showing juries what racial profiling looked like in practice. Civil rights attorneys played it during depositions, forcing other departments to confront their own policies and practices. Sullivan's case also became a teaching tool in law schools and criminal justice programs. Students analyzed every aspect of that Christmas Eve traffic stop, learning to identify the constitutional violations and the systematic failures that had enabled such conduct. Professor David Kim, who had represented Robert in the civil lawsuit, incorporated the case into his curriculum on police accountability. The ripple effects extended beyond law enforcement into broader discussions about racial justice and accountability. Community organizations used Robert's story to advocate for police reform, citizen oversight, and transparent complaint processes. The case became a symbol of what was possible when victims refused to accept injustice and communities rallied to support them. So there you have it. One Christmas Eve traffic stop that lasted 43 minutes and changed everything. Robert Hayes went from victim to victor, using his nightmare to create lasting change for countless others. Derek Sullivan went from badge-wearing bully to federal prisoner, learning the hard way that racism comes with a price tag he couldn't afford to pay. Sometimes justice takes time, but when it comes with interest. Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe for more stories where accountability actually wins. This case was intense, but this case on the right-hand side is even more insane.
Welcome. Our objective is clear: to pursue the truth and hold established power to account. We follow the paper trail because the official records never lie. Thank you for watching and seeking the facts with us.